Teresa was 46, burned out, and scared to check her bank balance. So she grabbed a binder, labeled a page, Freedom Plan, and changed her life. I didn't earn six figures. I just started telling my money what to do. She hit lean fire before 50, without quitting teaching. Financial Freedom Files. Full episode, now, playing on Dollar by Dollar. Watch the full story, 0 to $1 million. A schoolteacher's fire story. Teresa Martinez had taught 8th grade algebra for nearly 2 decades in the same worn-down classroom on the south side of Phoenix. Her students knew her as Ms. Martinez, the one who let them correct her own mistakes on the board, who brought in tamales every December, and who taught them more than just math. She taught them how to persist. But one spring morning, as she leaned over her chipped wooden desk and signed another stack of detentions, she noticed a slip of paper peeking out from the corner of her pay stub. It wasn't unusual. Notices came all the time. District budget cuts, union updates, health insurance adjustments. But this one hit different. It was a flyer, glossy, bright blue, titled, "Are you ready for retirement?" She wasn't. Not even close. She was 46 years old, and she had no plan. There was something so unsettling about that question, as if it knew her secret, as if someone had looked straight into her bank account and decided to send a reminder that time was ticking, and she wasn't ticking with it. For a moment, Teresa sat still in her squeaky chair, the bell still ringing in the hallway, her thermos of stale coffee forgotten. She read the paper again. Retirement Planning Seminar, Thursday at 4 p.m. in the district office. She scoffed. Who had time for a seminar after teaching 6 classes and doing parent emails until sunset? She barely had time to buy groceries. She was a single woman with no kids, no spousal income, no inheritance on the horizon. Just her paycheck, her tote bag, and her little one-bedroom apartment on Camelback Road. But still, the question nagged at her. That night, Teresa boiled rice and beans in a battered pot and stared at her laptop while the news played softly in the background. She typed "teacher retirement calculator" into Google and entered her numbers. Current age, 46. Annual income, $52,000. Current savings, $12,750. Pension estimate, $1,100 per month at age 65. Retirement goal, $40,000 per year. She hit calculate. The screen flashed of the brutal truth. She would run out of money in 13 years. Her throat tightened. She refreshed the page. Maybe it was wrong. Maybe she'd missed something. But no, it was accurate. Cold. Indifferent. That night, Teresa lay awake in bed staring at the ceiling fan as it spun like the clock she had always ignored. She had told herself that doing good was enough, that serving others would somehow carry her to safety. But goodwill didn't pay for dental work, or rent hikes, or a future without paychecks. She had never really been bad with money. She didn't shop frivolously or go on vacations. She used coupons, drove an old Honda Civic. Her biggest splurge was occasionally buying books that she could have gotten from the library. But she had never invested, never tracked her net worth, never thought much beyond making it to next month, because there was always something else. A student who needed lunch money, a niece's birthday, a broken AOC. And so the years passed, quietly, obliviously. She hadn't realized that survival was not the same as strategy. And now, she was out of excuses. The next day, she left the flyer on her desk, on purpose, so she wouldn't forget. When Thursday came, she drove to the district office in her sensible shoes and sat among a room full of tired educators holding lukewarm coffee cups. A young man in a blazer clicked through slides. Compound interest, employer match, Roth versus traditional. Teresa took notes furiously. She asked questions, and when it ended, she stayed behind. "What if someone's starting late?" she asked quietly. The presenter smiled politely. "It's never too late, but it does mean you'll need to be more intentional." More intentional. That phrase stayed with her like an echo. She went home, opened her laptop, and started building what she would eventually call her freedom binder. It was just a cheap blue folder at first, filled with printed articles from financial blogs and handwritten lists titled things like "Steps to Learn Index Funds" and "Expenses to Cut." For 2 weeks, she studied every night, during lunch breaks, in between grading. She discovered acronyms like FIRE, financial independence, retire early. She read about people making six figures who saved 70% of their income. She couldn't save 70%, but maybe she could start with 10, then 20, then more. She downloaded a free spreadsheet from a blogger named Mr. Money Mustache. She entered her income, her rent, her spending, and then she saw it. She was spending $270 a month on takeout and school lunches, another $180 on unused streaming subscriptions, $95 a month for a gym she hadn't visited in 6 months. It was like finding holes in a boat you didn't know was sinking. Teresa didn't shame herself. She didn't spiral. She took a breath, and she began. She canceled the gym, replaced it with morning walks at the park. She cooked all her meals for a week: rice, beans, lentil stew, roasted veggies. She bought a used slow cooker from Facebook Marketplace for $15 and batch-cooked chili for 2 weeks. She started bringing lunch to school in an old Tupperware that always leaked a little, but did the job. She opened her first Roth IRA with $200. And she said no. No to spontaneous brunch invites. No to fundraisers where she felt obligated to spend. No to teacher supply runs out of her own pocket. She started asking parents for help. At first, it felt like deprivation. Then it felt like clarity. It wasn't about giving things up. It was about finally choosing. Every dollar became a question. Does this get me closer to freedom? And every no was a yes to something else. She kept her freedom binder on her desk at home and filled it with monthly net worth updates, investing tips, and inspirational printouts. Quotes like, "Discipline is choosing between what you want now and what you want most." It wasn't easy. Some nights, she wanted to quit, to order a pizza, to go back to not knowing. But ignorance had a cost, and she'd already paid enough. By the end of the school year, Teresa had saved $4,200, more than she had in the previous 5 years combined. She had a Roth IRA with low-cost index funds. She'd read 3 personal finance books and even helped 2 fellow teachers open their own IRAs. And more than that, she had something she hadn't felt in years: momentum. She wasn't behind. She was just getting started. Teresa Martinez had spent most of her life saying yes. Yes to extra hours. Yes to PDA bake sales. Yes to a student who needed lunch again. Yes to a friend's wedding in another state. Even when the dress and plane ticket meant putting groceries on a credit card. Her yes weren't reckless. They were stitched into her nature. Helpful, accommodating, quietly agreeable. But one morning in late July, that began to change. She stood in the school supply aisle at Target, list in hand, whiteboard markers, tissue boxes, dry erase cleaner. It was the annual ritual. Teachers buying what their budgets couldn't cover. No one questioned it. But this time, Teresa hesitated. She looked down at the pack of markers in her hand. $8.49. Then at the bin of tissue boxes. $6.79. Her total would be over $40. And that was just the basics. She thought about her Roth IRA. About the 4-digit savings account she'd built in 3 months. About the blog post she'd read the night before. Every time you spend unconsciously, you rob your future self of choice. That sentence had clung to her like static. So instead of walking to the checkout, Teresa took out her phone, opened the classroom app, typed, "Dear families, this year we are asking for donations of tissues, markers, and basic supplies. If you are able, your contribution is appreciated." She stood in the middle of the aisle, thumb hovering over the screen, heart fluttering. What if they judged her? Thought she was lazy, selfish? She hit send and walked out of the store, empty-handed. It was a small thing, just $40, but it was a boundary. And boundaries, she was learning, were the scaffolding of freedom. Later that week, she said no again, this time to her cousin Maria, who invited her on a weekend getaway to Sedona. Teresa had always gone. It was tradition. Desert hikes, cheap wine, sunset selfies. "I can't this year," she texted. Maria responded with a sad face and a joke. "You becoming one of those fire weirdos?" Teresa smiled. "Kind of." That night, she poured herself tea and added another tab to her freedom binder. Saying no equals saying yes to me. The page stayed blank for a while. She didn't know what to write. But the feeling was there, new, awkward but powerful. Over the next few months, she practiced the art like it was algebra. She said no to the teacher lounge pizza pool. No to impulse buys. No to cute home decor on Instagram. No to weekend brunch. No to Amazon Prime. not with bitterness, but with quiet determination. At first, her world shrank. Fewer social invites, less chatter in the break room, more Friday nights alone with rice and Netflix. But something unexpected happened. Her world didn't just shrink, it clarified. The silence was uncomfortable at first, but then it became her sanctuary. She heard her own thoughts for the first time in years. Not the noise of what others needed or expected, but the soft voice beneath it all. What do I want? What does peace look like? What does wealth mean, if not control of my time? On a late August afternoon, Teresa sat under the lone shade tree in her apartment complex, reading Your Money or Your Life. A teenage neighbor walked by and asked what she was studying. Retirement, Teresa said with a grin. Cool, the girl replied, clearly not meaning it. But Teresa didn't care. She was building something invisible and sacred. Each no was a brick in the wall between her and burnout, between her and dependency, between her and being one of the elders working the register at the dollar store because they had no other option. One day, a fellow teacher named Deirdre popped in her room during lunch. Girl, what's your secret? You've been packing all these meals like clockwork, she said, pointing to Teresa's Pyrex container of lentils and brown rice. Teresa hesitated, then opened her binder. I started tracking everything. I'm trying to retire early. Deirdre raised an eyebrow. On a teacher's salary. Slow and steady, Teresa replied. Deirdre sat down. Teach me. That afternoon became a weekly ritual. Tuesdays with Teresa. They swapped frugal recipes, shared YouTube videos, compared index fund options. Teresa wasn't just saving anymore. She was leading. But leadership had a cost. In October, the principal asked her to join a curriculum committee, unpaid. She smiled, thanked him, and declined. At the holiday party, the staff drew names for Secret Santa. $25 minimum. Teresa passed. A few people noticed. Whispered. One teacher even muttered, must be nice to be too good for the rest of us. That stung. Teresa cried in her car. But the tears weren't regret. They were growing pains. She was molting the part of her that needed approval to feel okay. Every dollar she didn't spend became a seed, a vote for her own freedom. And every awkward no became a compass, pointing to the life she was designing, not the one she was defaulting into. By December, she had saved over $9,000 total. Not $1 million, but no longer zero. She was 46 and finally awake. The art of saying no had taught her the deepest yes. Yes to autonomy. Yes to clarity. Yes to a version of wealth that couldn't be measured by clothes or cars, but by peace. And that was the part no one had prepared her for. The peace. It was addictive. The numbers didn't lie. And Teresa had spent a lifetime listening to numbers. She taught her students that numbers told stories. A slope wasn't just a calculation. It was the arc of a life in motion. An equation wasn't just about balance. It was about relationships, about making both sides add up. But for years, she hadn't applied that logic to her own finances. That changed the day she opened her Vanguard account. It was a Sunday morning, quiet except for the hum of her second-hand fridge and the birds chirping outside her window. Teresa sat cross-legged on the floor of her tiny apartment, Freedom binder beside her, and stared at the login screen. Her finger hovered. This wasn't just opening an account. It was crossing a line she had avoided for years. Investing. She had always assumed it wasn't for people like her. She didn't come from money. She didn't have a financial advisor. She was just a schoolteacher with a calculator and a lot of questions. But over the past month, those questions had become answers. It started when Deirdre, her Tuesday frugal friend, brought her a worn copy of J.L. Collins' The Simple Path to Wealth. Inside the front cover was a note scribbled in purple pen. This book changed how I think. I hope it does for you too. Teresa read it in 2 days. It was the first time she'd heard someone explain investing without jargon. Just index funds. Simple, low-cost, long-term growth. Put your money in a broad market index fund, Collins wrote, and leave it there. That's it. No chasing stock tips. No timing the market. Just consistency. Simplicity. Faith in the system, tempered by patience. That message hit her like gospel. For the first time, investing didn't feel like gambling. It felt like planting. So that Sunday, Teresa created a Vanguard account. She chose a Roth IRA because she'd learned that it offered tax-free growth and retirement. And then came the big decision, where to put the money. She'd read enough by then to know what to look for, low fees, broad market exposure, and steady returns. She typed VTSEX, the Vanguard Total Stock Market Index Fund. She read the summary. Over 4,000 U.S. companies. Expense ratio, 0.04%. A favorite of fire bloggers and ordinary investors alike. She clicked buy. $1,000. Her heart raced. It was more than she'd spent on anything all year. But it wasn't spending. It was planting seeds. The next morning, she woke early, coffee in hand, and checked her account. The number was still there. No drama. No headlines. No fireworks. Just $1,000 sitting inside a fund that would grow over time. Quietly, invisibly. She stared at it like it was a new language. Because it was. This was not a lottery ticket. It was not a get-rich scheme. It was ownership. Tiny fractions of Apple, Microsoft, Google. Tiny slices of the entire American economy. She had never felt so oddly patriotic in her life. She laughed out loud at the absurdity of it. I own a piece of the country, she said aloud. Even if it's microscopic. That week, her teaching took on a new energy. When she taught compound interest to her 8th graders, she used herself as the example. If Ms. Martinez saves $500 a month starting at age 46, earning 7% annual returns, how much does she have by 65? The kids groaned. Do the math, she said, grinning. The answer stunned them. Nearly $240,000. Dang, Ms. M, one boy said. You gonna be rich? Not rich, she replied. Free. The students didn't understand that yet, but she was planting seeds in them too. At lunch, she opened her binder and started designing her $1,000,000 plan. Not a fantasy, not a daydream, a plan. $500 a month into her Roth IRA. Another $300 into a taxable brokerage account. A goal to max out her Roth each year. $6, $500. Her spending was already down 30% from last year. She was eating better, walking more, sleeping deeper. And investing was no longer scary. It was addictive. She checked her Vanguard balance too often at first, watching the numbers dance up and down like the Arizona wind. Sometimes it dipped. Once by $120 in a day. But she remembered what Collins wrote. The market is a roller coaster. Stay on the ride. So she stayed. She watched YouTube videos from creators who reminded her of herself. Teachers, nurses, admin workers, people who weren't flashy, but who were building quiet wealth through index funds and patience. She joined a FIRE Facebook group, where someone posted a graph of their investment growth since 2010. It was a simple curve, flat at first, then curving upward like a rocket. Compounding. It wasn't a concept anymore. It was a real force. Like gravity. Unseen, but relentless. And it made her furious. Why hadn't anyone taught her this? Not her parents. Not her college. Not the district. Not HR. No one had pulled her aside and said, you need to do this. But she wasn't angry for long. Because now she knew. And knowing was power. She made a mini presentation and offered it to the teacher's lounge during planning period. Investing basics for people who think they can't. 6 showed up. She brought coffee in a thermos and broke it down simply. Roth IRA. Index funds. Dollar cost, averaging. Staying the course. I'm not a financial advisor, she said. But I'm someone who used to think this wasn't for me. And I was wrong. By the end of the month, 4 of those teachers had open accounts. She started to feel like she was living in a secret world. A world where the quiet ones were building empires behind the scenes. One Saturday afternoon, she visited the public library downtown. Not to check out books, but to print out 10 years of her district pension estimate. She wanted to factor it into her plan. She sat at a cubicle with headphones on, listening to calming piano music, scribbling figures in her notebook. If she taught for 20 more years, she'd get around $1,100 a month. But if she reached FIRE in 12, she could still take a reduced pension and bridge the rest with investments. She ran the math 100 ways. She started to believe, not in the market, not in Vanguard, but in herself. Every dollar she put into VDSAX was a vote for her future self. The one who would read in cafes. The one who would hike in the middle of the day. The one who would never again ask, can I afford this? She called that future version of herself, Retired Teresa. She even drew a cartoon of her in the binder, gray streaks in her curls, walking along a beach holding a novel and a thermos of tea. She smiled every time she saw it, because Retired Teresa was no longer a dream. She was a destination. And Teresa Martinez, middle school math teacher, was finally walking toward her, with purpose, with plan, and with the quiet power of index funds behind her. By October, Teresa had whittled her monthly expenses down with the precision of a sculptor chipping away marble. What began as a casual review of her takeout budget had turned into something much deeper, an excavation of habits, assumptions, and inherited scripts about money. She now saw her budget not as a spreadsheet of sacrifice, but as a map, a blueprint to freedom. The transformation had been subtle, nearly imperceptible to outsiders. Her car, a faded silver Honda Civic with a dented bumper, was still parked in the school lot every morning. She still wore her practical flats and rotating cardigans. She still brought leftovers in a slightly cracked Tupperware. But internally, she had undergone a metamorphosis. She was no longer simply surviving the month. She was designing a life. And it started with the question, what's the absolute minimum I need to be happy? This wasn't about deprivation. It was about clarity. Teresa had stumbled across a blog post on Lean Fire, a form of financial independence based on covering essential expenses with investment income and living a minimalist, intentional lifestyle. Unlike Fat Fire, which required massive savings and high-end living, Lean Fire was simple, frugal, quiet, and, crucially, attainable on a teacher's salary. The article showed that if you could live on $25,000 a year and saved aggressively for 10 to 15 years, you could retire decades early. $25,000. That number stuck with her. Could she do it? She decided to find out. She called it the Fire Month Experiment. Starting November 1st, she would attempt to live as if she were already financially independent, on just $2,083 per month, or $25,000 per year. Her rules were simple. No new clothes. No eating out. No online shopping unless it was a budgeted necessity. Grocery budget capped at $200. Fuel, $60. Utilities, rent, and insurance, fixed. Anything left over went into investments. Her rent was $950 for a modest one-bedroom. She tried negotiating with her landlord before and was brushed off, but now she looked harder. She joined Facebook groups, signed up for housing newsletters, and even considered moving in with a roommate, a thought that made her both nervous and curious. But for now, she worked with what she had. The first few days of Fire Month were almost meditative. She rose early, walked instead of driving when she could, and embraced the rhythm of simple routines. Mornings began with a thermos of black coffee and oatmeal. Lunch was packed, chickpea salad, sweet potato soup, black bean burritos. Dinner was rotation, stir-fry, lentils, rice. She batch cooked every Sunday, lining her freezer with labeled containers like a prepper awaiting financial peace. Entertainment came from the library, novels, audiobooks, and a surprisingly addictive budgeting memoir by a woman named Kate Flanders. Teresa read under a blanket each night, tea steaming in her hand, a candle flickering nearby. It wasn't lonely. It was spacious. She found joy in the silence between obligations. She even turned budgeting into a kind of self-care ritual. Every Friday night, while her colleagues splurged on happy hour drinks, she'd light a scented candle, open her Excel sheet, and update her spending categories. One Friday, she discovered she'd underspent by $118 that week. She stared at the surplus like it was a prize. She immediately transferred it into her brokerage account. "Grow, little dollars," she whispered, laughing. But not everything came easy. Mid-month, she was invited to her niece's birthday party, a roller skating event with pizza, cake, and party favors. The unspoken expectation was that every adult would chip in. Normally, she'd spend $50 without thinking. Gift, snacks, gas. This time, she did something different. She baked a batch of homemade cookies with ingredients she already had and wrote a heartfelt note to her niece about how proud she was of her. She brought them to the party, slightly embarrassed. But her niece hugged her tightly and said, "Auntie T, you're the best baker ever." No one cared that she didn't bring Target gift bag. What mattered was her presence, not her presence. The experiment was working. By the end of the month, Teresa had spent just under $1,900. Not quite Lean Fire level, but close. The difference was immediate. She had invested over $800 that month. A new record. More than the money, though, she had proven something to herself. She could live on less. She could be content with less. And with every unnecessary expense stripped away, her values glowed like embers in a dark room. Time with people she loved. Quiet evenings with a book. Walks at sunset, knowing she was moving toward something. Slowly, steadily, intentionally. One Saturday morning, as she ran numbers in her fire calculator, she realized that at her current trajectory, saving $12,000 a year, with a 7% annual return, she could reach lean fire in 13 years. She'd be 59, but if she increased her savings to $15,000 a year, she could do it in 11. At 57, she leaned back, stunned. For the first time in her life, there was a finish line she could see. And it wasn't age 65. It wasn't dependent on a pension. It wasn't a fantasy. It was math. Achievable. Tangible. Real. She sat in silence for a while, sipping coffee and watching the sunlight stream through the dusty blinds. Could she go even leaner? Could she move somewhere cheaper? Find a house hack? Downsize even more? She started researching geo-arbitrage, moving to lower-cost areas or even countries to stretch her retirement dollars. Mexico, Portugal, Panama, places where $1,500 a month bought a life of comfort. She bookmarked forums, watched videos, and made a new section in her freedom binder labeled Future Home. The thought of living abroad scared her, but so did staying still forever. That night, she journaled something that made her eyes well up. I don't want a big life. I want a free life. And for the first time, she believed she could have it. Not because she'd won the lottery, not because she'd married rich, but because she'd learned how little she actually needed and how powerful that knowledge could be. Barebones fire wasn't a restriction. It was a release. It gave her something she hadn't had since childhood, permission to dream. And that, she realized, was the richest thing of all. Teresa Martinez never set out to make more money. That wasn't what fire had meant to her, not at first. She had accepted a modest life and reshaped it, choosing discipline over indulgence, clarity over clutter. Her strategy was simple: spend less, save more, invest quietly, and walk slowly toward the door labeled freedom. But even the most disciplined plans can evolve. Sometimes the universe offers a detour, and sometimes the detour leads to gold. It started with a whiteboard. Mid-January, the heater in her classroom clanged like an old engine, barely warming the air. Teresa was writing a real-world interest rate problem for her 8th graders, something she always tried to make relevant, even if half of them were more interested in TikTok. On the board, she wrote, "You invest $5,000 in an index fund with an average return of 7% annually. How much will you have in 15 years? Behind her, chatter rose and fell. A pencil snapped. A backpack spilled open. But one student, Jared, quiet, lanky, constantly underestimated, raised his hand. "Miss," he said, squinting, "is that like what you do?" She turned, surprised. "What do you mean? You said you were saving and investing. Is that like what you're doing with that Vanguard thing?" Teresa blinked. She had mentioned Vanguard during a previous lesson, just a throwaway example. But Jared had remembered. "Yeah," she said, slowly. "That's exactly what I do." He stared at the board again. "So if I start now, like at 14, could I retire early too?" The class quieted. For a moment, no one moved. And Teresa smiled. That's the idea. That night, something tugged at her. Jared's curiosity. The way the room had gone still. The brief flash of interest from kids who usually tune her out. She opened her laptop and typed into Google, "Personal Finance for Teens Curriculum." The results were either too complex or too dull. She wanted something real, honest, something like the binder she had built for herself. That's when the idea sparked. What if she created her own? She opened a blank Google Doc and titled it, "Money Math, a real-world financial literacy workbook for teens." By the end of the weekend, she had outlined 10 units. Budgeting basics, wants versus needs, the power of saving early, credit cards and interest traps, compound growth, taxes and paychecks, investing 101, how to read a pay stub, renting versus owning, your first job, your first budget. She built lessons around real numbers, real scenarios, and real stories. No fluff. She used her own journey as the through line. How she went from paycheck to paycheck, to opening her first Roth IRA at 46, how she budgeted with $50 grocery weeks, how saying no saved her thousands. And the more she wrote, the more it flowed. This wasn't work. This was release. By February, the document had ballooned to 70 pages. She shared a sample with Deirdre, her teacher friend, who loved it. "You should sell this," Deirdre said over Tupperware of quinoa salad. "Like, seriously. Teachers are starving for stuff like this." Teresa laughed. "Sell it. I wouldn't even know how." "Teachers pay teachers," Deirdre replied, without missing a beat. "It's a marketplace. You upload your stuff, people download it. Passive income, baby." That night, Teresa explored the site. It was filled with worksheets, PowerPoints, games. Most of it was low-quality clip art and bubble fonts. Her materials looked different, cleaner, deeper, grounded. She spent the next week polishing her workbook. She added reflection questions, glossary terms, a budget simulator, even a build-your-fire plan section based on real scenarios. When she uploaded it, she set the price at $12. She didn't expect much, but within 48 hours, she had her first sale. Then, 3 more. By the end of the week, 17. And a message from a teacher in Ohio. "Thank you. My students actually paid attention for once." Teresa sat at her desk, stunned. She wasn't just saving money now. She was making it. Passively. From her couch. From her story. By March, the workbook had earned $428. It wasn't a salary, but it was nearly a full Roth IRA contribution for the month. She added more resources, a slide deck, a quiz bank, a printable classroom poster that read, "Every dollar you save buys you freedom later." Her Teachers Pay Teachers store, which she named Money Roots, began gaining followers. She even created a logo, just a sprouting plant inside a calculator. It felt poetic. Every download was a ripple. Every comment, a tiny affirmation. She was no influencer, no flashy online guru. She was a middle school teacher in sensible shoes. But her voice mattered, and that realization changed something deep in her. She began blocking off Saturdays to work on Money Roots, treating it like a business. She kept a spreadsheet of earnings, goals, and feedback. She read articles on marketing, watched videos on passive income, and started an email list for other educators looking to teach financial literacy. But she did it all quietly. No Instagram selfies. No side hustle bragging. Just steady planting. By the end of the school year, her earnings from Money Roots totaled $2,173. And she hadn't spent a dime on advertising. It wasn't about the money. Not entirely. It was about leverage. That $2,173, when invested, could be worth over $6,000 in 10 years. She did the math. At her current pace, if she released 2 new products per quarter, and each one averaged 100 downloads a year, she could reasonably expect to earn an additional $4,000 annually. And if she reinvested all of it, she could reach FIRE 2 years earlier. That summer, Teresa took her first mini vacation. Not to a resort, not to a tourist trap, but to a quiet cabin in northern Arizona, where she sat by the window each morning with her laptop, editing her new workbook, budgeting for first jobs. She looked out over the pine trees and smiled. This peace, this purpose was why she was doing it. Not for luxury, but for autonomy. She realized something startling in that stillness. Financial independence wasn't just about what you stopped doing. It was about discovering what you were meant to start. Money Roots wasn't a hustle. It was her legacy. It was proof that you could start late, start small, and still build something real. Teresa Martinez, once just a math teacher scraping together dollars in a freedom binder, was now teaching hundreds of students across the country through the internet, planting seeds of empowerment in classrooms she'd never visit. And as she packed up her laptop that evening and walked outside to watch the sun set behind the trees, she whispered something only the wind could hear. "I didn't see this coming, but I'm glad I said yes." The human brain is terrible with numbers. It remembers the ones that hurt, forgets the ones that matter, and rarely understands the ones that compound. But Teresa Martinez had started retraining hers. It began with a simple question she wrote at the top of a page in her freedom binder one rainy September evening. What am I actually worth? Not in the emotional, philosophical sense, though those answers mattered too. She meant it literally. Financially. For decades, Teresa had avoided that question. Net worth felt like a game for the rich, something for spreadsheets in Fortune magazine or glossy bank ads. What did it have to do with a teacher who brought home $3,200 a month and packed lentils for lunch? But the deeper she ventured into her FIRE journey, the clearer it became. Net worth was a scoreboard, and she had never checked it. Not really. She'd tracked savings balances. She'd celebrated contributions to her Roth IRA. She'd even added a little yellow sticky note to her bathroom mirror that read, $100 invested today equals $2,000 later. But net worth, that was the whole picture. And until she faced it, she was guessing. So she made tea, opened a blank tab in her binder, and began writing. Assets. Checking account, $830. Savings account, emergency fund, $3,200. Roth IRA, Vanguard, $8,964. Brokerage account, VDSAX, $2,700. Teachers pay teachers' earnings. Pending transfer, $186. Car, market value, $2,200. Total assets, $18,080. Her hands trembled slightly. She'd never seen her financial life summed up like that. Then came the part she dreaded. Liabilities. Credit card, balance from an unexpected dental bill, minus $910. Remaining student loan, low interest, still lingering, minus $4,800. Furniture purchase, 0% promo plan from 2020, minus $970. Total liabilities, minus $6,680. She did the math. Net worth, $11,400. She blinked, checked it again. The number was positive. For the first time in her adult life, Teresa Martinez's net worth was above zero. She leaned back in her chair, stunned. Not rich, not independent, but not in the red, not underwater, not gasping. For years, she had felt like she was standing still, walking through wet cement, invisible and burdened. But now, the numbers were clear. She had climbed out of the hole. She was building, not bailing, and she sat there, watching the rain crawl down her living room window, tears slipping quietly down her cheeks. Not because she was sad, but because it had taken so long to believe she deserved this clarity. The next morning, she marked the day in her calendar, September 12th. Net worth turned positive. She decorated the box with stars. At school, she moved through the day in a strange haze. The halls felt brighter. The noise didn't bother her as much. She even hummed a little while washing out her thermos. Because something had shifted. She was no longer operating from scarcity. She had proof she was climbing. During lunch, she emailed Deirdre with the subject line, "Party popper, guess what?" Deirdre replied instantly, "You hit positive?" "Yes," Teresa wrote back. $11,400. I double-checked. "I'm so proud of you I could scream," Deirdre replied. "When we retire on a beach together someday, I'm going to remember this day." They laughed about it in person later, but beneath the laughter was something real. A landmark. A mile marker on a long, quiet road. That weekend, Teresa decided to do something bold. She logged into her Vanguard account and increased her automatic contribution. It had been $500 a month. She pushed it to $600. It pinched, but it felt like claiming her future. She added a new page to her binder, Net Worth Tracker. Each month, she updated the numbers. Assets, liabilities, the gap widening ever so slowly. She even created a simple bar chart with color-coded lines, red for debt, green for investments. The green line began to overtake the red. It was beautiful. There was something almost spiritual about it. A visual map of her becoming. Her FIRE calculator began to show an earlier retirement date. 58, then 56. Not guaranteed, but possible. And that possibility kept her going. In December, Teresa gave herself a gift. She paid off her lingering furniture balance in full. The couch and bookshelf she'd bought during the pandemic, when everything felt uncertain, now fully hers. She snapped a photo of the receipt and taped in the binder with a note. Goodbye, 0% plan. Hello, ownership. The next day, she celebrated in the quietest way imaginable. She made black bean soup, lit a candle, and watched a documentary on geo-arbitrage in Mexico. That night, she journaled. I used to think freedom was something far away, a someday thing. Now I realize it's built in layers. And today, I added another one. In January, her district sent out 2 forms, and for the first time in her life, Teresa sat down and reviewed it line by line, not with confusion, but curiosity. She used it to cross-reference her contributions. She noticed that her taxable income was lower than expected, thanks to her 403(b) deductions. She'd forgotten about that account entirely. She logged into the provider's clunky website and stared at the screen. $17,900. Just sitting there, slowly growing. She added it to her assets column. Her net worth jumped to $29,700. She gasped. She was so much closer to $50,000 than she'd thought. She updated her chart. The green bar now doubled the red. And she had a new goal. By her 47th birthday, she would cross $50,000 in net worth. She called it the halfway marker. Not halfway to $1 million, but halfway to psychological safety. Halfway to the day when she'd no longer fear emergency vet bills or rent hikes or saying yes when she wanted to say no. Halfway to the part where money no longer dictated every decision. She created a mini vision board for the milestone. Cut out magazine pictures, a hammock, a coffee mug, a small house with a garden. She glued them onto a cardboard square and tucked it into her binder. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't Pinterest-worthy, but it was hers. In February, Money Roots brought in $612. She split it, half to her Roth IRA, half toward her credit card. And in March, she did something even more daring. She submitted a guest blog post to a popular fire site called Women on the Path. Her title? The Day My Net Worth Turned Positive at 46. It was raw, personal, honest. She told the whole story. The binder, the math lesson with Jared, the furniture payment, the green and red bars. She signed it, Teresa M., teacher and late bloomer. 2 weeks later, they published it. And the comments rolled in. Dozens of readers thanked her. One woman wrote, "I'm 48 and just getting started. You gave me hope." Another said, "My net worth is -2, but you made me believe it won't always be." Teresa cried. And then, she logged into Vanguard. Her total across all accounts, $31,482. Her liabilities, $3,950. Net worth, $27,532. Still climbing, still steady. And now, no longer alone. She closed her laptop and whispered to herself, soft, sacred, certain, "I'm not behind. I'm just beginning." It came in a plain white envelope, slipped under her apartment door. No warning. No friendly heads-up for the leasing office. Just cold, bold lettering at the top. Notice of rent increase. Teresa froze in the doorway. Grocery bags digging in her fingers. A bead of sweat from the August heat traced down her back. She dropped the bags, peeled open the letter, and read. Her rent was going up by $210. Effective in 60 days. From $950 to $1,160. She read it again. Then again. Her heart pounded in her ears. The hum of the refrigerator suddenly sounded like a scream. That number, $1,160, lodged itself in her brain like shrapnel. It didn't fit. It didn't fit her budget. It didn't fit her fire plan. It didn't fit her vision of the future. And worst of all, it didn't come with a choice. For the first time in months, panic gripped her. The kind that tightened your throat and made your carefully built spreadsheets look like sandcastles in a tide. She had spent over a year trimming expenses, tracking every cent, planting investment seeds like a farmer awaiting spring. And now she was expected to pay $2,520 more a year, just for the privilege of keeping the same 4 walls and leaky sink she'd had for nearly a decade. She wanted to scream, cry, throw the letter into the recycling bin and pretend it never came. But she couldn't afford denial anymore. Instead, she sat at her tiny kitchen table, took out her Freedom binder, and flipped to a fresh page. She wrote, problem, rent hike, $210 per month. Options. She listed everything. Negotiate. Unlikely. Move. Where? Get a roommate. Would she even survive that? Side hustle more. Already near maxed out. Cut more expenses. Already so lean she could feel the bones. Sublet on weekends? Too risky. House hack? Too soon. Take a breath? Yes. Start there. So she did. She made tea, closed the binder, took a long walk under the blistering Arizona sun, sandals crunching on gravel, eyes half closed against the glare. As she walked, she recited a single mantra like a pulse. I have built too much to unravel now. Back home, she went online and began researching like a woman possessed. Phoenix rental market, roommate arrangements for professionals, teacher housing co-ops, Craigslist, Reddit threads, YouTube tours of 300 square foot micro apartments. Everything. And slowly, like a puzzle forming from the chaos, an idea emerged. Not perfect, not elegant, but possible. She remembered something she had dismissed months earlier while researching house hacking. A term, live-in landlord. The concept was simple. Rent a larger apartment, then rent out one of the bedrooms. Split the costs. Gain privacy. Build savings. Could she do that? Could she upend her quiet, introverted, candlelit peace for the sake of math? That night, she did the numbers. If she found a two-bedroom for $1,400 and brought in a roommate at $700, her share would be $700, less than her current rent, even before the hike. She blinked at the figure. It wasn't just damage control. It was leverage, a potential win, but still, letting someone in, into her space, into her routines. She shuddered at the thought of shared kitchens, passive-aggressive dish rotations, awkward small talk. And yet, she imagined her future self at 58, sitting on a beach with a book, no job to rush back to. What would that version of Teresa say? Do it scared, she whispered. So she did. In late September, Teresa gave notice to her landlord. She toured 6 apartments and finally signed a lease on a modest 2-bedroom unit 20 minutes from school. Slightly older building. Brick exterior. Shady courtyard. Decent light. Rent, $1,390. She took a deep breath, then wrote a roommate listing. Private room and bath in a quiet home. Ideal for a respectful, employed woman. No drama. Clean, calm, scent-free preferred. $700 per month, utilities included. She posted it everywhere. Teacher groups, local classifieds, Facebook housing forums. Within 2 weeks, she had 6 inquiries. 3 were obvious no's. 1 flaked. But one, Asha, stood out. Asha was a 33-year-old pharmacy technician, recently divorced, looking for a fresh start. She worked odd hours, kept to herself, and didn't smoke or drink. They met at a cafe. Asha arrived early, wore glasses, asked smart questions. I just want peace, she said. I don't need a friend. Just a quiet place to land. Teresa nodded. That's exactly what I'm offering. They shook hands. And just like that, Teresa became a landlord. Not in the traditional sense, but in the fire sense. In the practical, strategic, get yourself free at any cost sense. On October 1st, she moved in. The apartment was nothing special. Beige walls, thin carpet, an outdated stove that made strange clicking noises. But to Teresa, it felt like a revolution. Her room was cozy. Her books fit. Her freedom binder had a place of honor on the bookshelf. Asha moved in a few days later. She was quiet, respectful, and mostly kept to her room. They passed each other like clockwork. Shared groceries weren't a thing. Boundaries were clear. It worked. It wasn't perfect. There were moments of tension. Forgotten dishcloths. Different ideas about fridge space. But it was manageable. And the best part? Each month, Teresa only paid $690 in rent. That savings, over $270 a month, was immediately rerouted to her investments. She upped her Roth IRA contribution again, this time to $650 monthly. She also created a housing arbitrage tab in her binder, where she tracked every dollar saved due to her new setup. In 6 months, it totaled $1,620. In 1 year, over $3,200. All invested, all compounding. That single decision, saying yes to discomfort, had added literal years to her freedom timeline. And then, in March, something wild happened. She was featured in another fire blog. Not just quoted, featured. The headline: How a Middle School Teacher Hacked Her Housing and Cut 30% Off Her Fire Date. The comments poured in. One woman wrote, I thought I was too old to house hack. This changed my mind. A man said, this is the most practical fire story I've read in months. And somewhere, in the quiet of her now half-shared apartment, Teresa smiled. Because the apartment that almost broke her plan It had become the very thing that accelerated it. There's a particular kind of exhaustion that lives in the bones, the exhaustion of decisions. Small, daily, relentless ones. What to eat, when to wake, how much to spend, where to cut, when to say yes, and when to say no. Teresa Martinez had lived in that fog for years. Not from lack of intelligence, she was a math teacher, after all, but from the mental fatigue of micromanaging a life that never seemed to grow beyond survival. Even when she had turned her net worth positive, even when she was investing monthly and tracking every penny in her freedom binder, the decisions still haunted her. Each day required vigilance, conscious restraint, and a constant question, am I doing enough? Until one Saturday morning in spring, a single podcast changed everything. She was meal prepping at the stove, sautéing onions in olive oil for a week's worth of lentil soup, when she heard a woman on a Fire podcast say, I automate everything. Every dollar has a destination. That way, I don't make emotional decisions. I just live. Teresa paused, spoon in hand. I just live. The phrase hit her like a gust of wind. Could money really feel that simple? Could she just live? She turned off the burner, grabbed a pen, and opened her binder to a new page. Operation, autopilot. She made a list. Direct deposit, split between checking and savings. Roth IRA, automatic contributions on the 1st. Brokerage account, contributions on the 15th. Emergency fund, top off monthly until $10,000. Credit card, autopay, full balance. Rent, set recurring Zelle payment to landlord. TPT income, 80% to investments, 20% to future fund. Buffer, $200 in checking for small surprises. It wasn't that she didn't trust herself. It was that she was tired of asking permission from her own brain to do the right thing. And if automation could give her that rest, she would take it. The next day, she logged in her payroll portal and split her direct deposit. $2,100 to checking, $800 to savings, $300 directly to Vanguard. It felt like slicing a cake in advance, before temptation could touch it. She set her Roth IRA to auto-invest $650 on the 1st of each month, then configured her brokerage account to invest another $300 mid-month. Timed to the extra TPT income she'd started pulling consistently. Then came the most satisfying click of all, autopay on her credit card. For years, Teresa had lived in fear of interest. She had always paid on time, but the worry lingered. Now, with automation, she could breathe. No more checking due dates like a student afraid of late homework. No more holding her breath for bill cycles. Just steady, silent motion. By the end of the week, her entire money system had transformed. No more budgeting by spreadsheet. No more weekly guild audits. No more do I transfer this now or later. Now, her job was simpler. Don't overspend what's left in checking. That was it. She even created a monthly snapshot page in her binder, a one-pager she updated at the end of each month. Just 4 numbers. Total net worth. Amount invested this month. New income streams. Fire date estimate. The first time she filled it out, she cried. Not because it was sad, because it was finally simple. And with simplicity came peace. It crept in slowly. First in her mornings. She no longer woke up with a pounding mental checklist. Her bills were paid. Her savings were growing. Her debt was melting quietly in the background. Then in her evenings, she had time again. Real time. Emotional time. The kind of space that invited joy instead of just rest. She picked up knitting. Walked in the evenings. Borrowed books not to escape, but to dream. Even her relationship with food changed. Without the emotional fog of financial stress, she found herself eating slower, cooking more intentionally. She even experimented with sourdough, laughing at her failed loaves like they were little life lessons. She started calling this feeling her financial exhale. For the first time since her 20s, she wasn't bracing for impact, and others noticed. Deirdre said she looked lighter. Her students said she smiled more. Even Asha, her roommate, commented one evening, "You've got like grandma energy now." In a good way. Teresa laughed. "I'll take that." She was spending less energy on money and more on life. And with that peace came clarity. She realized she'd made it over the hill of the hardest part, starting. She was no longer scared of the unknown. She trusted the plan. She trusted herself. One evening, she sat at her kitchen table with a glass of hibiscus tea and did a little exercise she'd read about in a fire subreddit. It was called, "What if I did nothing?" She imagined never contributing another dollar. No more investing. No more saving. Just letting her current investments grow at 7% annually. She ran the math. Even without future contributions, she'd have nearly $400,000 in 18 years, enough to supplement a partial pension, Social Security, and part-time income if she wanted it. And if she kept contributing, she was on track for $700,000 or more. Teresa blinked at the numbers. They weren't magic. They were momentum. She didn't have to sprint anymore. She just had to walk. The next day, she added a sticky note to her mirror. "Your future is paid for. Go live today. And live." She did. With more energy, she leaned deeper in her classroom. She created a mini elective for 8th graders called Money Math Mondays. It wasn't official, but a group of students stayed after school each week, asking real questions. What's a credit score? What's a down payment? How do you not freak out about money? She told them the truth. I used to freak out. A lot. But then I learned how money really works. And now it works for me. They stared, half believing. But one girl, Lucia, whispered, "I want that." Teresa nodded. "You can have it." Because financial peace wasn't about age or income or even education. It was about alignment. Automating her money didn't mean giving up control. It meant reclaiming her brain for bigger things. She started journaling again, sketching garden layouts for the home she hoped to buy one day, researching places she might live post-fire, coastal Portugal, mountain towns in Ecuador, sleepy villages in Oaxaca. She called it dream mapping, and the dreams came easier now. She wasn't chasing freedom anymore. She was already living a small version of it. Every automatic deposit was a quiet reminder. You're free, even if no one claps. And in the silence, she smiled. The email arrived just after lunch duty, buried between a field trip permission slip and a reminder about parent-teacher conferences. The subject line was bland enough to be ignored. District compensation update. Please read. Teresa almost deleted it, but something in her gut said, "Open it now." She clicked, scanned, slowed, and then stopped, reading it again, word by word this time. Effective immediately, due to state-level budget shortfalls, a salary freeze will be enacted for all certificated staff. No step increases or COLA adjustments for the coming fiscal year. Salary freeze. No raises. No cost of living bump. No nothing. Teresa leaned back in her chair, her fingers still hovering over the mouse. Around her, the clatter of middle school energy echoed through the hall. Lockers slamming, laughter bouncing off tile, footsteps sprinting toward freedom. But inside her, stillness. 1 year ago, this would have wrecked her. 1 year ago, she would have spiraled into anxiety, scrambling through her bills, reworking every budget line, questioning whether she could stay in teaching at all. But this year, she didn't panic. She exhaled slowly, picked up a pen, and wrote in the corner of her planner, "Salary freeze. Keep calm. Fire still lives." Later that night, she opened her freedom binder and flipped to her fire tracker. She scanned the green lines of growth, the consistent investments, the debt balances that were now just echoes. Her monthly budget hadn't depended on a raise in a long time. She had created a plan where her present didn't need more. Her future just needed time. Still, she wasn't blind to the implications. A salary freeze meant inflation would eat away at her real income. Groceries would cost more. Gas would nibble at her buffer. It wasn't nothing, but it also wasn't everything. She had spent a year building financial resilience, and now it was being tested. And she was ready. She pulled out her emergency flex plan sheet, a list she'd created months earlier, just in case of surprise changes. At the top, she'd written, "If income drops or costs rise, here's where we pivot." Calmly, she reviewed the options. Pause Roth contributions temporarily. Not yet, but good to know. Reduce brokerage transfers by 25%. Optional. Could free up $75 per month. Use TPT income as a flex buffer instead of reinvestment. Smart for now. Grocery budget challenge month. She'd done $100 per month before. Pull from emergency fund. Only if absolutely necessary. She smiled. The decisions were made in advance. All she had to do was execute. That's what peace looked like. Not the absence of problems, but the presence of a plan. Still, she did one thing that night. Something small but symbolic. She walked to her refrigerator, pulled off the sticky note that read, Roth max equals $6,500. Don't miss it. And replaced it with a new one. Adapt. Adjust. Continue. It wasn't failure. It was flexibility. The next day, she wore her math is magic t-shirt and taught compound interest with more fire than usual. Because she'd lived it, was living it. She told her students a version of the truth. Sometimes, life won't give you a raise. But if you've already built something underneath you, you'll still stand. They blinked, unsure what she meant. But maybe one day they'd remember. That week, she spent a quiet Sunday doing what she now called her financial flight check. A once-monthly ritual where she reviewed her automations, balances, and budget for the coming 30 days. She noticed her grocery budget had slowly crept up to $280 a month. Nothing wild, but room to trim. She pulled out her notebook and drafted a plan. Shop once every 10 days instead of weekly. Revisit $30 meal prep plans she used early in her journey. Return to simple staples: oats, rice, beans, frozen veggies. No snacks that didn't stretch. Chips out, popcorn in. Soups. Always soups. It wasn't punishment. It was optimization. She even made it fun, challenging herself to create meals under $1.50 per serving. Fire Chef, she called it, laughing. Her first creation, a red lentil curry with potatoes and frozen spinach. 8 servings. 83 cents per bowl. She posted it to her Money Roots page and got a flood of messages from teachers trying the same thing. The comments lifted her, because she wasn't just weathering the storm, she was helping others navigate theirs. By April, the cost-cutting had worked. She'd absorbed the salary freeze without touching her investments. Her net worth still climbed. Her contributions remained. Her stress stayed low. And then, something unexpected happened. Her teachers' pay teachers' income had been growing quietly in the background. The new unit she'd uploaded in February, budgeting for teen jobs, was trending. Her March earnings were $728. April hit $941. She gasped when she saw the total. That was more than her first paycheck as a teacher back in 2004. Passive income. Resilience in action. She made a decision right there at her tiny kitchen table. For every dollar her TPT income exceeded $500 per month, she would funnel 75% straight into her Roth to replace any future salary gaps. It wasn't about greed. It was about acceleration. She had always thought investing was about income. Now she understood it was about infrastructure. She was building a machine that kept moving, even when her job couldn't. And then, just as the district's freeze settled into collective resignation, something wild happened. Teresa got an email from another district. An old colleague had moved to Oregon and wanted Teresa to help build out a statewide financial literacy curriculum. It's just a few hours a month, the woman wrote. We need your voice. We'll pay you $250 per hour. Teresa stared at the screen. She reread it 3 times. $250 an hour. Even if she did just 4 hours a month, that was $1,000 per month. Suddenly, the salary freeze didn't just seem survivable. It seemed irrelevant. But that wasn't the point. The point was this. She didn't say yes right away. She paused. She thought, does this align with my time values? Does this support my peace? Only then did she respond, yes, but I'll only take on work that doesn't interfere with my teaching on my Saturdays. Those are mine. And that's when she realized just how far she'd come. Money was no longer the boss of her. She was. The woman who used to panic over overdue library books and $50 overdraft fees was now turning down lucrative work if it interfered with her joy. Because true wealth, she had learned, was never just about numbers. It was about choice. And she had earned hers. That May, as school wrapped up, Teresa reflected in her journal. The freeze didn't stop me, because I was already free. There are moments that don't seem like much when they happen. A number on a screen. A balance update. A new comma where there wasn't one before. But for Teresa Martinez, the day her net worth hit 6 figures was more than just numbers. It was a resurrection, not of wealth, but a belief. It happened quietly, on a warm September evening. The sky outside her kitchen window streaked with orange and violet. She had just come home from work, kicked off her shoes, and microwaved leftovers, brown rice, roasted squash, and lentil stew. She ate slowly at the small dining table that doubled as her office, watching the sun slip behind the neighbor's roof. Asha, her roommate, was on a weekend trip with friends, so the apartment was still. Soft. Peaceful. She opened her laptop out of habit. No rush. Just routine. She logged into Vanguard first. Her Roth IRA had crept above $27,000. Her brokerage, fueled by consistent TPT income, was now $19,200. She pulled out her Freedom binder, turned to the page titled September Net Worth Snapshot, and began to fill it out line by line. Assets. Roth IRA, $27,184. Brokerage account, $19,211. 403B, $21,300. TPT income, not yet withdrawn, $892. Emergency fund, $9,800. Savings for future home, $5,000. Checking account, $1,374. Car, use value, $2,000. Total assets, $86,761. Then she added one more. Earlier that week, the Oregon curriculum team had paid her for the month's contribution, $1,000. She deposited it that day and hadn't updated the binder yet. She added it in. Total assets, $87,761. Next came the liabilities. Credit card, $0. Auto paid, always. Remaining student loan, $3,400. No other debts. Total liabilities, $3,400. She did the math. Net worth equals $87,761 to $3,400 equals $84,361. Close. Very close. She smiled and sipped her tea. She hadn't realized how near she was. She thought she was still months away from the six-figure summit. But with how her TPT sales were trending, it might happen sooner than she'd thought. Still, she didn't rush. She didn't start projecting, chasing, obsessing. She just kept going. 2 weeks later, on a Sunday evening, she repeated the ritual, just to check. She updated her balances, line by line, as she always did. This time, her Roth had hit $28,220. Brokerage, $20,301. TPT income, $1,127 in pending payouts. Emergency fund, $10,400. 403B, $21,900. She stopped, checked again, did the math. Total assets, $101,129. Liabilities, $3,400. Net worth, $97,729. She laughed aloud. Still not quite there. She sat back, opened a pack of roasted seaweed snacks, and thought about how funny it was that she cared more about the process than the milestone now. When did that happen? When had she stopped chasing the fireworks? The next day, she forgot to check. Life was happening, student assessments, curriculum revisions, a freezer that decided to defrost on its own. But on October 2nd, while sipping coffee before sunrise, she logged in again. Her 403B had posted a quarterly bump. So had her index funds. She typed slowly into her spreadsheet, fingers trembling just a bit. Total assets, $103,870. Liabilities, $3,330. And there it was. Net worth, $100,540. Six figures. She blinked at the screen, not because she didn't believe it, but because she did. And believing it, that was the real milestone. She took a breath. Not a gasp, not a shout. A deep, calm inhale. Because this wasn't a lottery ticket. This wasn't a gift. This wasn't a fluke. This was 12,000 tiny choices. Every budgeted grocery trip. Every night she cooked instead of ordering out. Every auto transfer into that Roth when it stung. Every book she read when others were binge-watching. Every no to things that glittered. Every yes to her own piece. It was boring, unsexy, consistent, and it had worked. She didn't buy anything to celebrate. No champagne. No new shoes. No trip to the spa. Instead, she turned the page in her Freedom binder and wrote, October 2nd, six figures. I did this. $1 at a time. She decorated it with tiny stars. Just pen and paper. A sacred page. Later that day, she walked to the park with her headphones in, listening to an episode of Choose FI. The guest, a woman from North Carolina, was talking about what she called the invisible turn. It's the moment you realize that your money is now working harder than you are. You don't always feel it. It doesn't come with confetti, but something in you shifts. You no longer chase security. You are security. Teresa paused the episode, stared at the sky. That's what this felt like. The invisible turn. She was past the point of financial fragility. She no longer feared the dentist, or the car breaking down, or missing a paycheck. She no longer measured her worth in struggle. She had options now, and options are the currency of freedom. That evening, she journaled one sentence. I don't want to be rich. I want to be unbothered. And that, she realized, was what she had begun to build. Not wealth for its own sake, but sovereignty. She was the same woman, same tote bag, same denim jacket, same old Civic parked out front. But her posture had changed. Her silence was no longer empty. It was full of choice. The next week, she hosted a small Money Roots live Zoom workshop for 20 teachers around the country. She shared her story, walked them through her original binder, showed her fire spreadsheet on screen. When she revealed her current net worth, the chat lit up. Wait, you started from scratch at 46. This is so encouraging. Thank you for not being flashy. I believe I can do it now. And that's when it clicked. Her six-figure net worth wasn't just a number. It was a permission slip for her and for others. She closed the workshop with a smile and said, "This isn't the finish line. It's the foundation, a solid place to stand while we keep building." That night, she went to bed early. No fanfare, just gratitude. The next morning, she made coffee and stood at her window as the sun painted gold on the horizon. Somewhere out there, her future self, the one who sat by a garden, who read novels all afternoon, who never worked another day she didn't want to, was waiting. And now, she was coming for her. Not in a rush, not in desperation, but with the slow, steady steps of a woman who had already done the hardest part. She had changed her life, $1 at a time. Teresa never imagined she'd become the kind of teacher kids return to visit. The hallway hug kind. The one they remembered not for her algebra lessons, but for how she made them feel about the future. But in her 19th year at Roosevelt Middle, something began to shift. It wasn't dramatic. There were no grand speeches or viral classroom moments. It was quieter than that. It started with a simple question she scrawled across the whiteboard one Monday morning in October. What's something you wish adults had taught you about money? Her students groaned. It was the week after fall break. Brains were still in rest mode. But one hand went up. Like, how not to be broke, a boy said. The class chuckled. No, really, he added. How not be scared all the time. Like my mom. She never says it, but I can tell. Teresa didn't smile. She nodded. That's a real answer. Anyone else? More hands followed. How credit works. Why food stamps don't buy everything. How much an apartment costs. What a good job even pays. Why everything's so expensive now. By the time the bell rang, her board was filled with marker ink, scribbled thoughts from 13-year-olds who carried the weight of adult questions on their still-growing shoulders. That afternoon, Teresa sat in her classroom long after the halls had emptied. The math she'd been teaching all these years, formulas, functions, fractions, wasn't irrelevant. But for many of her kids, it wasn't enough. They needed numbers that meant something, that helped them survive, and maybe even helped them dream. So she pulled out her binder, turned to a blank page, and wrote, Money Math Mondays, draft curriculum. By the next week, she had a pilot lesson ready. It wasn't official, not yet approved, but it didn't need to be. She pitched it as an enrichment hour, open to any 8th grader who wanted to learn more about real-world money. No homework, no grades, just real talk. She expected 5 students. 14 showed up. They dragged desks into a circle, ate snacks, looked skeptical. Teresa smiled. So, what's the first thing you want to learn? Why taxes take half your check, one boy said. Why my mom cried when she saw her W-2, a girl added. Teresa nodded. She pulled out her own pay stub, names and numbers redacted, and passed around copies. They gasped. You don't even get your full check. Nope, she said. But I know where every dollar goes. They leaned in. She taught them the difference between gross and net income. What FICA meant. Why teachers had pensions. How compound interest could turn a $100 investment into $1,000. They didn't yawn. They asked questions, took notes, looked at each other like they'd found a glitch in the matrix. Each week, the room got fuller. Some students brought their siblings. Others came just to listen. One girl, Marisol, brought her mom's pay stub and asked Teresa to help them understand it. Another student, Darius, created a budget based on his weekend lawn care hustle. He proudly announced that he'd opened a savings account and deposited $200. "It's for college," he said, "or maybe a car, but it's not for Jordans." The class clapped. Teresa blinked back tears. These kids, many from families who live paycheck to paycheck, who watched their parents struggle silently, were hungry, not just for knowledge, for control, for hope, and she was giving it to them. But what she didn't expect was what they gave her in return. They reminded her what money was for. Not just security, not just retirement, but connection. One week, she asked them to write their definition of wealth. They scribbled in silence. Then read aloud. "Being able to help my grandma. Not crying when my fridge breaks. Being home for dinner with my kids someday. Being able to say no to a bad job." None of them said mansions, or Lamborghinis, or TikTok fame. They were 13, and they already understood. Money wasn't about things. It was about options. They were learning the lesson Teresa had taken decades to find, and it humbled her. At home, she began journaling their words, saving their quotes. She even created a private notebook titled Student Fire Sparks. In it, she wrote, "These kids are not behind. They are not broken. They are simply unschooled in the language of wealth. But once they speak it, they'll be unstoppable." One Friday, a boy named Malik lingered after class. He was quiet, always had been, the kind who stared at the floor more than the board. But today he stood in front of her desk, fidgeting. "Miss." "Yes, Malik." "My mom said, thank you for showing me how to make a budget. She said you're the reason I stopped asking for new Nikes." Teresa smiled. "You don't want the Nikes anymore?" He shrugged. "I do, but I want peace more." And there it was. The invisible curriculum. The part that wasn't in any textbook. Money wasn't just about transactions. It was emotional, cultural, generational. And in that classroom, week after week, Teresa was doing more than teaching math. She was breaking cycles. At the end of the semester, she printed tiny fire starter certificates for each student who completed all 8 weeks of Money Math Mondays. The kids laughed, but some clutched those papers like diplomas. One taped his to his locker. Another laminated hers and put it on the fridge. Teresa looked around the room during their final circle, half-eaten cupcakes, crumpled napkins, laughter echoing, and felt something deeper than pride. It was purpose. She hadn't reached fire yet, but she had lit the match for dozens of young lives. And in doing so, she'd found the spark in herself again. Not just as a woman, not just as an investor, but as a teacher, the kind they would remember. Not because she made them memorize formulas, but because she showed them what freedom looked like. One choice, $1, one question at a time. And the best part, they believed her. Because she didn't just teach it, she lived it. For most of her adult life, summers had been less about rest and more about recovery. They were spent catching up on grading, on laundry, on missed doctor's appointments and delayed oil changes. Teresa often filled her June and July with summer school, tutoring, and part-time gigs just to stretch her teacher's salary far enough to make August feel livable. But the summer she turned 48, something shifted. It started with a question she hadn't allowed herself to consider before. What if I didn't work this summer? It felt radical, indulgent, borderline irresponsible. Because teachers didn't take summers off. Not really. Not the ones with student loans, rising rents, and aging cars. But Teresa was no longer that woman. She had options now. Her net worth had crossed 6 figures. Her TPT store brought in $800 to $1,200 a month, even in the slow seasons. Her emergency fund sat, untouched and sturdy, at $11,000. She had no credit card debt, no upcoming financial emergencies, no reason to hustle. And maybe, just maybe, this was the reward. Not retirement. Not yet. But a test flight. A sabbatical. A full summer without punching a clock, without side gigs, without asking her worth to be validated by productivity. She sat at her tiny kitchen table, wrote the word sabbatical in bold across a clean page in her binder, and underlined it 3 times. Then, below that, she wrote, start date, June 3rd. End date, July 31st. Purpose, to rest, to reflect, to prepare for my next chapter. She gave herself rules. Not restrictions, but rails to guide her time. No monetized work unless it energized her. No grading, no tutoring, no online curriculum jobs. Limited phone use in the mornings. One creative outlet per week. At least one new place visited each month. Daily movement. Daily rest. She called it her pre-fire rehearsal. Because that's what it was. A rehearsal for the life she was building. The first Monday of her sabbatical felt like any other summer morning. Quiet, warm, with the chirp of sprinklers and the scent of overwatered lawns wafting through the windows. But instead of opening her laptop to check work emails or planning materials, she took a slow walk to the corner cafe with her journal. She ordered an iced coffee and sat near the window. Time, usually fractured and frantic, stretched in front of her like a long, empty road. She didn't know what to do with it. So she wrote. For 2 hours. Nothing profound, just the kind of musing she never had space for during the school year. She wrote about the students she missed, the money truths she still wanted to learn, the countries she wanted to visit, the things she hadn't done, not out of fear, but out of sheer exhaustion. By the end of that first week, something strange happened. She stopped clenching her jaw. Her sleep deepened. She no longer woke at 3 a.m. rehearsing lesson plans or replaying budget calculations. She cooked new things. Lentil shakshuka, homemade tortillas, almond flour muffins. She reorganized her freedom binder, not because it needed it, but because it brought her joy. She even painted again, watercolors, messy and imperfect. She hadn't picked up a brush since her 20s. And slowly, the question changed from can I afford a rest to what happens when I do. One morning, sitting cross-legged on her secondhand couch, Teresa pulled up her fire spreadsheet. She adjusted the formulas, removing all side hustle income for June and July, just to see. Even without extra work, her plan was fine. She'd still match a Roth, still meet her savings goal for the year, still stay on track to reach lean fire at 55. She stared at the screen, blinking. Her money could carry her now. Not forever, but for a season. And the peace that settled over her in that moment was unlike anything she'd felt in her 2 decades of adulting. She realized something important. Financial independence wasn't just about someday. It was about this day. A day when she didn't need to trade her energy for dollars. A day when she didn't feel guilty for reading in the middle of the afternoon. A day when she chose herself without apology. The second week of July, she took a solo trip to northern Arizona, a quiet cabin outside Flagstaff, surrounded by tall pine trees and crisp morning air. She brought only a backpack, her watercolor set, and 3 library books. She hiked in the mornings, painted in the afternoons, and wrote long letters to herself each evening. Letters she labeled to Teresa at 58. In one, she wrote, I hope you're proud. I hope you still walk slow. I hope you've kept your time sacred. On the final night, she built a small fire pit and roasted marshmallows alone, wrapped in a thrifted flannel blanket. She stared at the flames, then at the stars, clear and unapologetic above the treetops. No noise, no plans, just breath, and warmth, and awe. That night, she finally understood what she had heard so many fire bloggers say. Retirement isn't about quitting work. It's about owning your time. And for the first time in her life, she did. When she returned to Phoenix, tanned and peaceful, the world felt different. Or maybe she did. She spent the rest of her sabbatical creating a mini course for teachers, Rest as Resistance, a financial literacy framework. It was free, just 5 short videos and a downloadable guide that helped teachers create their own sabbatical plan, financially and emotionally. She shared it with her Money Roots community. Hundreds downloaded it. One teacher emailed, I've never taken a summer off. I thought I couldn't. You changed that. Teresa cried. Because that's what the sabbatical had really been about. Yes, it was rest. But more than that, it was proof. Proof that she was no longer surviving. Proof that the system she'd built worked. Proof that wealth wasn't measured by what she earned, but by how she lived. At the end of July, on the last day of her sabbatical, she wrote in her journal, I didn't waste this summer. I reclaimed it, and I'll do it again, every chance I get. She closed the book, brewed tea, and went to bed early. The school year would begin again soon. The bells would ring. The students would flood in. Life would return to its usual pace. But Teresa Martinez would return different. Not just rested. Empowered. Because now she knew, even before full fire, freedom could live in the margins. And she had made space for it, with a binder, a plan, and one brave yes to herself. The first time Teresa Martinez saw it, she almost walked away. It was small, humble. The paint peeled in places. The lawn was overgrown with brittle weeds, and one of the wooden fence posts leaned like it had given up holding anything back. But something in her gut said, look again. It was early October. The Phoenix heat had just begun to back off, leaving behind mornings that felt cooler, crisper, like a page turning. Teresa stood at the curb of the narrow, sun-faded street and stared at the house. It was a 1950s ranch style, one of those post-war homes with square lines and a carport instead of a garage. 2 bedrooms, 1 bath, just under 900 square feet. Nothing fancy, nothing staged, but it had one thing that made her pulse quicken, a price she could afford. $148,000. In Phoenix. Unheard of. But the listing had been up for a week with no offers. Why? Because it needed work. The roof was aging. The windows hadn't been updated since the Reagan administration. The backyard was more dust than dirt. Still, it was hers if she wanted it. And she did. Oh, she did. But she was terrified. She'd been a renter her entire adult life. She knew how to navigate leases, not mortgages. She'd spent 2 years building her fire foundation, automating investments, crushing debt, tracking every dollar. And this felt like the opposite of frugality. A 30-year loan, property taxes, homeowners insurance. It all sounded like a giant leap back into financial fear. But then she remembered something her friend Deirdre had told her months ago, back when Teresa had first mentioned wanting her own space. You don't buy a house to impress anyone. You buy to build your roots. Even tiny ones. Roots. That was it. She didn't want a big house. She wanted a base. A permanent, manageable space to live and, eventually, fire from. She took a long breath and dialed a realtor. His name was Marcus, a soft-spoken man in his 50s with laugh lines and no pressure in his voice. She liked that. They toured the inside together. Original tile in the kitchen, cracked but charming. The living room was oddly shaped, but flooded with morning light. Both bedrooms were small, but had windows that opened to citrus trees in the neighbor's yard. It's not sexy, Marcus said. It's me, Teresa replied. She submitted her offer that night, $142,500, a little below asking. She expected rejection. She got an acceptance. No counter, just a quiet yes. When the email came through, she stared at it for 10 full minutes, then whispered to no one, I'm buying a house. The next weeks were a blur of paperwork, home inspections, phone calls to the credit union, and long talks with her binder. Her down payment would be $30,000. She'd saved $20,000 already. The other $10,000 would come from her TPT income and temporarily reducing brokerage contributions for 2 months. Her mortgage payment would be $870 per month, only $180 more than what she was paying with her roommate. And once she moved in, she could consider house hacking, renting the spare bedroom to a quiet tenant, just like she'd done before. It was a stretch, but it wasn't reckless. It was a calculated step, a new phase. She called it Operation Freedom Home. She set a budget for move-in expenses, $3,500 for initial repairs, $2,000 for furniture, used, repurposed, $1,200 buffer for utilities and setup costs, $1,000 for professional cleaning and paint. She refused to go over, and she didn't. She got the keys in early November. The first thing she did was walk through the empty house barefoot. The wood floors creaked. The air smelled like age and possibility. She stood in the middle of what would be the living room, turned slowly in a circle, and laughed. Not out loud, just from the center of her chest. Because she never thought this would be her. Not at 48. Not on a teacher's salary. Not without anyone else's name on the paperwork. And yet, here she was, a homeowner. She posted a photo to her Fire Facebook group. Not the outside of the house, but her bare feet on the floor, next to a steaming mug of coffee. The caption read, Bought my freedom base. Small. Paid with peace. Let's build from here. The comments rolled in. You did it. This is the dream. Freedom over fancy. Yes. Home is where the net worth lives now. The next 2 weeks were a whirlwind of transformation. Her friend Deirdre came over with buckets of white paint and 2 folding chairs. They painted the living room while listening to Norah Jones and drinking tea from mismatched mugs. Teresa bought a used futon from Craigslist, found a bookshelf for $25. She slept on an air mattress for a week and didn't mind, because every single thing in that house had been earned, slowly, intentionally, dollar by dollar. She spent one Saturday planting rosemary, sage, and mint in the backyard. Just herbs in old pots. But to her, it was the start of a garden, a sign of rootedness. She didn't buy new appliances, didn't renovate, didn't rip out the old cabinets. She lived in it, grew into it, and every night, as she sat on her tiny second-hand couch, binder open in her lap, she felt something new, a kind of groundedness that renting had never allowed. She was no longer at the mercy of a landlord, no longer waiting for renewal notices or panicking about rent hikes. She could stay, as long as she wanted. That winter, her net worth dipped slightly. Closing costs, repair expenses, furniture. But she didn't panic, because this wasn't a step backward. It was a step inward. She updated her fire plan accordingly. Her new monthly costs: mortgage, $870. Utilities, $190. Insurance, $85. Maintenance savings, $150. Total, $1,295. Still well within her lean fire budget, especially if she chose to rent out the second bedroom down the line. For now, she kept it as a guest room. She wanted solitude, wanted to hear her own thoughts echo in the quiet. And they did. One night in December, she stood in her backyard under a sky pricked with stars, hands wrapped around a mug of cinnamon tea, and whispered, "I bought this with a binder, with beans and rice, with saying no, with staying home, with teaching kids what no one taught me, and I'd do it all again." The house wasn't her finish line. It was her launch pad. Her freedom didn't start with $1 million net worth or a high-paying job. It started with a decision to trust herself, to believe that slow could be powerful, that small could be enough, that ownership didn't have to be flashy to be profound. The house didn't just belong to her. She belonged to it, because she had built this life not on luck, but on choice. $1 at a time, one binder page at a time, and now, one room at a time, she was filling it with peace. The change was subtle. There was no dramatic makeover, no glossy before and after photo of Teresa Martinez standing in front of her new house with a set of keys and a triumphant smile. She didn't upgrade her wardrobe. She didn't suddenly start shopping organic or wearing Apple AirPods. Her car remained the same dented silver Honda Civic, sun-faded roof, and all. Her tote bag was still patched in one corner, and her go-to grocery store was still the discount market with the flickering freezer aisle light. But something fundamental had shifted. Her life had widened, not through spending, but through space. And not just physical space, though the 2-bedroom house gave her that. Emotional space, temporal space, the kind of room in your head that lets you stop bracing for impact, the kind that allows silence to feel like serenity, not a void. It began, surprisingly, with the couch. Teresa had bought it used, $120 from a woman moving out of state. Mid-century lines, firm cushions. The fabric smelled faintly of lavender. She hauled it in with the help of Deirdre and a dolly, sweating in the Phoenix heat, both of them laughing between panting breaths. They set it down in the middle of the living room, facing the window. That night, after a friend had gone home and the house had quieted again, Teresa sat down and did something she hadn't done in years. Nothing. She sat in the stillness of her own home, sipped tea, and simply existed. And in that moment, she understood something she had never fully grasped during her most frugal years. Frugality was never the goal. Peace was. The lentils, the spreadsheets, the envelope budgeting, they weren't badges. They were tools, ways to carve out space where she could live on her terms. And now, finally, she was. But here's the part that surprised her most. With a little more breathing room, she didn't abandon her old systems. She leaned into them, because they weren't restrictions anymore. They were rhythms. Her binder still lived on the same corner of the bookshelf, pages dog-eared and ink smudged with life. She still sat down every Friday night to do her financial flight check, not out of panic, but because it had become a ritual, a meditation almost. She'd pour herself tea, light a candle, open her laptop and her binder, and run through the numbers. Net worth update. investment contributions, spending highlights and lowlights, notes on what felt good, what felt strained, fire projection review. There was something sacred in it now, like checking in with a beloved friend. And because the pressure had eased, she started exploring areas she used to avoid, like values-based spending. She created a new tab in her binder, aligned expenses. She wrote at the top, "What would I happily pay for, even if I never reached fire?" Then she listed donations to mutual aid and student support funds, art supplies, local theater tickets, travel to see old friends, workshops and learning, ethical goods from small businesses, surprise gifts for people she loved. These weren't costs. They were choices. She gave herself a monthly freedom fund of $200. No guilt, no restrictions. It wasn't much, but it gave her agency. The first thing she did with it, she bought a used sewing machine from an online yard sale, $60. Not because she needed one, but because she remembered how her grandmother used to sew and how it had once brought her joy. She relearned simple stitching, started mending her clothes again, not to save money, but because she found comfort in her hands bringing old fabric back to life. That winter, she made 3 scarves from scrap cloth and gave them as gifts. When her student Lucia saw her wearing one, she asked, "Miss, did you buy that at Target?" "No," Teresa smiled. "I made it." Lucia blinked. "That's kind of cool." At home, Teresa wrote in her journal, "Wealth, to me, is a life where I can afford to do things slowly." And slowly, her life expanded. She hosted a potluck in her backyard in early spring. 6 friends, 2 folding tables, mismatched dishes, twinkle lights from the dollar store. They ate enchiladas, sipped chilled wine, and talked about books, burnout, and what they wished they'd learned in school. Someone asked her, "What would you do if you didn't have to work anymore?" And Teresa, without hesitation, said, "Exactly this." That's when she realized something she'd been circling for months. She wasn't waiting for fire. She was living it, in pieces. Now, her life wasn't flashy. Her income was still modest. Her index fund balance wasn't anywhere near $1 million. But her days were hers. Her choices were deliberate. Her stress, once a constant hum, had become a rare visitor. And that freedom, it wasn't in the future. It was stitched into her mornings, her routines, her Friday budgeting rituals, her slow walks around the neighborhood, her tiny garden, where the rosemary had taken over and the mint refused to die. She still packed her lunches, still drove the same car, still shopped at Goodwill. But now, she did it with joy. Not because she had no other option, but because she had decided what mattered. Her values, simplicity, sustainability, education, peace, hadn't changed. Her lifestyle had evolved, but it had grown in the direction of herself. One morning, standing in her tiny kitchen while the coffee brewed, she thought of a line she'd read in a fire blog once. "We don't escape the rat race by running. We do it by walking, slowly, intentionally, in a direction of our own choosing." She'd copied that quote into her binder years ago. Now it lived in her bones. Because she wasn't running anymore. She wasn't even chasing anything. She was walking, every step aligned with who she had become. And that was the most radical transformation of all. Not what she had, but who she was. For nearly 3 years, Teresa Martinez had been moving toward one fixed point in time. Her fire date. It had been circled in her freedom binder, highlighted in neon yellow, updated monthly based on market performance and contribution levels. It was her North Star, the magic number in the not-so-distant future when work would become optional, not mandatory. At first, it was 65. Then, with effort and frugality, 62. After she discovered index funds, 59. And after her side hustle took off, and she hacked her housing situation, and she automated her finances, the number settled at 55. Teresa didn't just believe in that number. She clung to it. It represented everything she had never felt growing up: security, agency, escape. It gave her purpose on difficult teaching days, fuel for saying no to impulsive spending, and permission to dream in her quietest hours. But one Wednesday in early spring, something happened that she hadn't prepared for. She stopped needing it. Not because she was rich, not because the market had delivered some massive return, but because, slowly and without fanfare, her life had begun to resemble the one she'd been working toward. It started like any other morning. She woke before sunrise, brewed her single cup of dark roast, opened the blinds to let in the soft light, and padded over to her binder. It was the first Wednesday of the month, her ritual check-in day. She opened her laptop, pulled up her Vanguard dashboard, and reviewed the numbers. Roth IRA, $41,990. Brokerage, $36,700. 403b, $27,300. Emergency fund, $10,500. Home equity, $15,000. Conservative estimate. TPD monthly earnings, $1,003. March. New Oregon curriculum income, $1,000. She did the math. Her net worth, $130,000, and growing steadily each month. But this time, as she updated her FIRE calculator, she paused. Her current projected FIRE date, the age at which she could reasonably expect to withdraw 4% from her investments to cover her minimalist lifestyle, was 54 years, 6 months. Just over 6 years away. She should have felt thrilled. But instead, she blinked at the number and felt quiet. She took another sip of coffee, waited for the usual hit of motivation. It didn't come, not because she was disheartened, but because something in her gut had shifted. 6 years no longer felt like a sentence. It didn't feel like waiting, because she had stopped waiting. She was already living a version of freedom. A smaller one, yes, still anchored to her job, still conscious of her budget. But her days had softened. Her mornings were slow. Her evenings were hers. Her work no longer defined her identity. Her side hustles weren't grinds. They were aligned with her values. Her home was peaceful. Her time was increasingly under her own control. What else was she chasing? Teresa stared at the FIRE date for a long time. Then she did something she never thought she'd do. She deleted it from the cell. Not from the plan entirely. She still believed in the math, the discipline, the destination. But she didn't need a countdown anymore. Because her life no longer felt like a clock ticking down. It felt like living. That evening, she went on a walk around her neighborhood. The air was cool, scented faintly with jasmine from a nearby garden. Her sandals slapped softly against the pavement as she passed familiar houses. A little girl waved from a porch. A man walked his beagle across the street. The city moved around her in a gentle rhythm. She wasn't trying to escape it anymore. She realized, on that walk, that her original vision of FIRE had been born from scarcity. Get out. Get safe. Get away. But now, her motivation had transformed. It wasn't about running from something. It was about walking toward something. Not early retirement, but intentional living. And that was already happening. Today, here, now. The next day, she opened her freedom binder to a fresh page and wrote at the top, "Freedom is a practice, not a date." Then, underneath, "I used to chase the end of work. Now I chase the beginning of peace." She rewrote her goals. Instead of retire at 55, she wrote, "Work because I want and not because I must. Wake without an alarm 5 days a week. Take 2 full months off every year. Keep money simple, joyful, automated. Use money to deepen relationships, not escape them. Spend more time making than scrolling. Continue growing, not just savings, but self." She no longer wanted to sprint towards some magical finish line. She wanted to grow roots in the present. And in that shift, she discovered a deeper layer of financial independence, one that couldn't be measured in net worth updates or Roth IRA growth. A kind of emotional independence. No more frantic calculating. No more tight-chested fear. No more tying her happiness to a future she couldn't yet touch. That weekend, she joined a local volunteer group, a financial literacy mentorship program for teenage girls. They met every Saturday morning at the library. She taught them about budgeting, about credit, about building a life with purpose. But more than anything, she taught them the things she had only recently learned herself. That freedom wasn't something you bought at the end. It was something you built into every corner of your day. She wore her same old sneakers, ate the same lentil stew, packed the same frugal lunches. But now, she didn't do it out of desperation. She did it with intention. She no longer needed to prove anything to anyone. Not to herself, not to the world. The FIRE date had served its purpose. It had given her direction, urgency, and hope. But now, her compass had changed. She was no longer moving toward a single finish line. She was living in alignment with her values every single day. And that, she realized, was the truest kind of independence. It didn't wait. It didn't count down. It began. With a binder. With a budget. With a brave, quiet belief that her life was already enough. It started with a letter. Or rather, an old one. Wrinkled and yellowed with time, tucked inside a warm manila folder Teresa hadn't touched in years. She found it by accident while organizing her filing cabinet during one of her quiet joy weekends, the kind she had started cultivating now that her life no longer pulsed with urgency. It was labeled, in her own handwriting, "To me, age 30." She hesitated, sitting cross-legged on the floor of her little home office, binder beside her, a cup of lukewarm tea on the rug. Then she opened it. The handwriting was sharp, angled, still rushed, still heavy from the exhaustion of her 20s. The letter was dated during her 3rd year of teaching, in a cramped one-bedroom apartment with a leaky ceiling and a fridge that moaned every time it cooled. Dear Teresa, I hope you're safe. I hope you're not still drowning in overdraft fees. I hope you finally figured out how to say no. I hope you have something saved. Anything. I hope you're not tired all the time. Teresa stopped. She could still remember writing it. The loneliness of that night. The paycheck that hadn't stretched. The envelope she couldn't bring herself to open because she knew it was a medical bill she couldn't afford to pay. She kept reading. I hope you know your worth by now. I hope you've stopped pretending that someday things will fix themselves. And I really hope, you've started planning. Because I don't want to wake up at 50 and feel this scared. Her chest tightened. And then, unexpectedly, she smiled. Because she was now 48. And the woman who had written that letter? She had been afraid. But she had also been wise. She had planted the seed. Teresa folded the letter gently and held it in her hands like a fragile relic. Then she stood up, walked into the living room, pulled out her freedom binder, and turned to a fresh page. At the top, she wrote, "A gift for her, age 58. This one wasn't a plea. It was a plan, a tribute. Because the woman she was now had everything that version of herself had dreamed of. Peace, control, options, warmth. And it was time to repay the favor. Not with a vacation or a splurge, but with strategy. Because love, she realized, could also look like preparation. She began drafting something she hadn't dared tackle before. A 10-year freedom map. Not just projections. Not just net worth goals. But real, soul-deep decisions meant to support her future self. The one who would one day walk slower. Who might not want to work even part-time anymore. Who might want to live near the ocean. Who would want stability, ease, and quiet generosity. The Teresa of 58. And the first gift she gave that woman? A paid-off home. She ran the numbers. Her mortgage balance was $108,000. If she continued paying only the minimum, $870 a month, she'd still owe about $70,000 in 10 years. But if she added just $250 a month, she could shave off 5 years. And if she directed all extra income from her teachers' pay teachers store and side curriculum consulting, she could be mortgage-free by 56. The thought stunned her. Owning her home outright. No housing insecurity. No rent hikes. No landlord decisions. Number 30-year debt. She imagined walking through her kitchen at 58, barefoot, coffee in hand, and knowing that no one could take the roof over her head away. That was worth everything. So she made it official. She set up an auto payment plan, $1,120 a month toward her mortgage, $250 above the required minimum. She labeled it in her bank dashboard as Future Me Fund. The second gift, a quiet retirement envelope. She had read about this concept in a FIRE forum, a separate savings fund earmarked not for emergencies or short-term travel, but for the invisible costs of slowing down. Not big healthcare bills or relocation, but smaller, human things. Replacing appliances in her 60s, helping a niece with college, planting fruit trees in her backyard, taking a month to write a book, not to publish, just because, paying a physical therapist to help her move with grace. She created a high-yield savings account and nicknamed it Gentle Future. Each month, she auto-transferred $100 from her checking. She added a line in her binder. This is not for fire drills. This is for softness. The third gift, a letter, just like the one she'd found. But this time, from a woman full of hope, not desperation. She sat down at her desk, pulled out her best pen, and began to write. Dear Teresa at 58, you did it. Not all of it. Maybe not the million. Maybe not the beach house or the perfect knees or the big milestones. But you did the hard part. You learned how to live without fear. You made a life out of simplicity, rhythm, and kindness. You figured out how to say no without guilt and yes without worry. You owned your time. You took care of your body. You taught students how to name their futures. And you taught yourself how to hold a quiet day like it was treasure. I hope you still walk slowly. I hope the rosemary in the garden still thrives. I hope you laugh just as easily. And I hope you know all of this was for you. She folded it neatly, placed it in a sealed envelope, wrote on the outside, to be opened on your 58th birthday. Then she tucked it into her binder, between the home equity plan and aligned expenses sections, because that's where it belonged, between action and intention, between discipline and love. That weekend, she walked through her neighborhood and looked at each small, square house with new eyes. Not as a place to leave, but as a place to age into. She could see it now, the long arc of a life well lived, not because of extravagance or fame or even early retirement, but because of care. She had cared. Enough to budget. Enough to say no. Enough to rest. Enough to write herself a new story. And now, enough to leave breadcrumbs for the version of herself yet to arrive. Teresa had never talked to her parents about money. Not really. There had been mentions, of course. Passing phrases woven into the background noise of her childhood like static. We'll figure it out. That's too expensive. Don't tell your father I used the card again. We're not poor. We're just behind this month. She grew up with those sentences, their weight subtle but steady, like water dripping into a cracked pot. By the time she was old enough to understand, she'd learned not to ask, especially not about retirement. That was a conversation loaded with shame, with silence, with the long sighs her father exhaled after opening the mail. And for most of her adult life, she kept that silence alive, out of respect, out of avoidance, out of fear that, if she pulled back the curtain, she'd see a storm she couldn't control. But now, at 48, Teresa was no longer avoiding hard truths. She had built a system, a life, a peace. And with it came a kind of clarity that left no room for silence anymore. It started with a phone call. Her mom, Sophia, mentioned in a casual tone, too casual, that the car needed repairs again. We'll use the credit card, she said breezily. It's just $800. Teresa paused. She knew that tone, knew what it meant. A cover-up, a brave face. How much is already on the card, Mom? A beat of silence. Not much, Sophia replied, too fast. Can we talk? Like, really talk? Just about the big picture. Her mother didn't respond right away. But eventually, she said softly, maybe it's time. That weekend, Teresa drove the hour south to her parents' house. A modest stucco home with faded shutters and a creaky screen door that had never been replaced. She brought no lectures, no spreadsheets, just her binder. She carried it into the kitchen like it was a potluck dish. Her dad, Carlos, was stirring pozole on the stove. Sophia sat at the table, folding napkins, her eyes cautious. They chatted for a while, about neighbors, about Teresa's house, about her students and her sewing. But eventually, the words turned heavier. Are you two still working on paying off the cards? Teresa asked gently. Carlos sighed, long and low. They don't go away, Mija. You pay and pay, but they grow. Sophia added, we're still paying for your abuela's hospital bills from 5 years ago. Teresa didn't flinch. Do you want help sorting it? They both froze, as if help was a foreign word. Something you gave your children, not the other way around. Carlos shook his head. We're fine. You're surviving, she said gently. That's not the same. Sophia looked at her, eyes rimmed with something like hope. How would we even start? And that was the door Teresa had been waiting for. She opened her binder, flipped to a blank page, and at the top wrote, Martinez Family Financial Clarity, First Meeting. Carlos chuckled. You're serious about this? Always. They started small. Teresa asked about monthly expenses, income, which cards had balances. She wrote it all down, slow and steady, never flinching. The numbers weren't great. A combined Social Security income of $2,400 a month. Nearly $12,000 in credit card debt across 3 accounts. No retirement accounts. No investments. No emergency fund. But Teresa didn't panic. She didn't judge. She did what she had trained herself to do. She mapped it out. This isn't a crisis, she said, circling one line. This is a situation, and situations can be solved. She outlined a plan. Step 1. Call the credit card companies. Ask about hardship plans or lower APRs. Step 2. Create a simple zero-based budget with cash envelopes for groceries, gas, and discretionary spending. Step 3. Automate minimum payments and funnel any side income or TPT support Teresa could offer toward the highest interest card. Carlos frowned. You're not responsible for this. I know, Teresa said, but I'm not doing this out of guilt. I'm doing this out of love. Over the next month, they held a financial check-in every Sunday via Zoom. Sophia learned to use cash envelopes and liked it. It feels real, she said, holding up her labeled pouches. Groceries, gas, medicine, cafecito. Carlos started reading Teresa's budget worksheets and even offered to create a spreadsheet of monthly expenses. And slowly, the tension began to melt. Not the debt, not yet, but the silence, the fear, the weight of not knowing. Teresa called it the clarity dividend, because just knowing the numbers, naming them, changed everything. By month 3, they had shaved $1,200 off the debt using a small tax refund, careful spending, and Teresa's support from her side hustle. More importantly, her parents no longer felt alone. Carlos smiled more. Sophia started baking again, and one evening, on their weekly call, her dad looked into the webcam and said, I don't lie awake thinking about bills anymore, just about how to fix the front steps. Teresa laughed, blinking back tears. That's progress. Then came the moment she hadn't planned for. Carlos pulled out a small notebook and slid it toward the screen. I made a list, he said, of everything I'd regret not telling you, if anything ever happened to us. Inside were account numbers, passwords, insurance policies, a will, signed and notarized. I want you to be prepared, Mija, he said. I've seen too many families fall apart because no one knew where anything was. Teresa exhaled. Thank you. That night, she journaled. Today I became the parent, not out of duty, but out of love. And in doing so, I realized that financial independence isn't just about ourselves. It's about breaking the cycles that came before us, about handing off something better than we inherited. That weekend, she invited her parents to her home. They sat on her tiny second-hand couch, drinking tea and looking at her herb garden through the sliding door. Sophia smiled. This is what peace looks like. And Teresa said, it's what we're all building, together. Before they left, she handed her mom a small envelope. Inside was a simple card. On it, a handwritten message. You taught me to survive. Now, let me teach you how to thrive. Tucked inside was a check for $500. A gift. No strings. Carlos tried to give it back. Teresa shook her head. This is what the next generation is for. You've earned rest. Her mom teared up. And that's when Teresa realized. Fire wasn't just about quitting a job. It was about healing a lineage, correcting what had once been invisible, turning survival into stability, and eventually, into strength. The email subject line simply read, Invitation to speak at Southwest Educators Conference 2026. Teresa almost deleted it. She thought it was spam, maybe a marketing pitch, maybe someone wanting her to attend, not to present. But curiosity pulled her mouse toward the message. She opened it. Her eyes skimmed the opening lines, then slowed, then stopped altogether. Dear Ms. Martinez, we've been following your work through your Money Roots materials and your recent contributions to financial literacy in public education. Several educators on our committee shared your guest blog on net worth at 46 and your TPT curriculum. We would be honored to invite you to speak at this year's Southwest Educators Conference as a featured voice in the financial empowerment space. Your story has touched thousands already. We believe it's time others heard it too. Teresa stared at the screen. She reread it, then reread it again. Her tea had gone cold in her hands. The sun was slanting low through her blinds, but all she could hear was a soft internal voice whispering, They want you. She hadn't asked for this. She hadn't pitched or networked or maneuvered. She had simply shared her binder, her budgeting worksheets, her late-blooming fire journey, her small victories and big emotions. And now, someone was asking her to turn her quiet into a microphone. Her first instinct was to say no. Public speaking had never been her thing. She preferred papers and pens, not podiums. Give her a class of 30 squirmy 8th graders over a room of professional adults any day. But then she thought of Jared, her student who'd first asked about Vanguard. Of Lucia, who wore her Money Math Mondays t-shirt like a badge of pride. Of her parents, who were finally sleeping without fear of the mailbox. She thought of the Teresa from that letter. Age 30, scared, broke, pretending to be fine. And then she whispered, "Okay." She clicked reply. "I'd be honored." The conference was scheduled for late April, a 3-day event in Tucson, just a 2-hour drive from her home. They asked her to prepare a 30-minute keynote session, Personal Finance for Teachers, A Path to Peace. The topic was hers to shape. Her story was hers to tell. She had 60 days to prepare. And for once, she didn't panic. She made a new section in her binder. At the top, she wrote, "The speech I never thought I'd give." Then she outlined 3 things. Her story, raw, honest, quiet. Her systems, binder, automation, values-based spending. Her message, that it's not too late, and you don't need to earn 6 figures to reclaim your life. She practiced late at night, whispering lines while stirring lentils. She recorded herself, then listened on walks. She practiced hand gestures in the mirror, laughed at herself, rewrote awkward phrases. She didn't want to sound rehearsed. She wanted to sound real. When the day finally arrived, she packed light, a navy blue dress, her binder, and a small USB with her slides. Her car hummed down I-10 through the desert, the horizon open and endless. She rolled down the window, letting the warm April air brush her cheeks. She arrived early, checked in, and wandered the halls of the conference center, watching groups of teachers laughing, chatting, swapping coffee and lesson plans like baseball cards. They didn't know her, but they would. At 3:15 p.m., she stood backstage, clutching the clicker in her right hand, her notes in her left. She heard her name through the speaker system. "Please welcome Teresa Martinez, public school math teacher, curriculum creator, and financial literacy advocate." Applause. Soft. Polite. She walked out. The room wasn't massive, maybe 150 people, but it felt like a stadium. She stood behind the lectern, smiled once, then began. "Hi, I'm Teresa. I've been a teacher for 19 years. I got my first overdraft fee at 23. I opened my first retirement account at 46. I didn't know what a Roth IRA was until a student asked me what Vanguard meant on the board. And today, I'm here to tell you something I wish someone had told me. It's not too late." The room shifted. People leaned forward, and Teresa told her story. How she was once scared of her own bank account. How she used a 3-ring binder to change her life. How she said no to things she couldn't afford and yes to values she couldn't ignore. She showed photos of her budget pages, of her $30 grocery meal plan, of the tiny house she bought, and how it became her freedom base. She shared her net worth graph, not with pride, but with reverence. "I'm not rich, but I'm free. I no longer panic at the grocery store. I no longer avoid my mailbox. I no longer wonder if I'll be working at 75. And if I can say that, anyone can." She paused. The room was still. Then she flipped to her final slide. A photo of her binder, open to the page titled Aligned Expenses. And below it, in bold letters, "What would you happily spend money on, even if you never reach fire?" She looked up and said, "That's the real question. Not, when can I retire? But what kind of life am I willing to build, slowly, on purpose, starting today?" Applause erupted. But this time, it wasn't polite. It was alive. She stepped down from the stage, hands trembling, eyes wide. People lined up to talk to her, to thank her, to tell her she cracked something open inside them. A woman hugged her and whispered, "You gave me permission." Another said, "You didn't just talk numbers. You talked truth." That night, Teresa sat on the hotel bed, still wearing her dress, binder beside her, and cried. Not from fear, not from exhaustion, but from something bigger, a quiet, overwhelming sense of arrival. She had not only rebuilt her own life, she had begun helping others do the same. And all of it, every moment, had started in the middle of her life. Not at 25, not with a trust fund, not with a perfect resume, but with a binder, a library card, and the willingness to begin. It happened on a Wednesday, a regular, unremarkable Wednesday. The kind where the morning sun filtered lazily through the kitchen blinds, the coffee brewed quietly while the kettle hissed, and Teresa's Civic hummed patiently in the driveway, waiting for another slow commute to Roosevelt Middle. She hadn't planned anything special for that day. There was no birthday to mark, no holiday, no event. Just a few quizzes to grade, a parent-teacher conference in the afternoon, and maybe a walk through the neighborhood before dinner. She opened her binder that morning like she always did on the first Wednesday of each month, a ritual so familiar now, it felt like breathing. She sipped her tea, logged into her Vanguard dashboard, and blinked. The screen loaded. Roth IRA, $47,122. Brokerage, $42,700. 403B, $33,100. Emergency fund, $11,300. Home equity estimate, $20,000. Other savings accounts, $5,300. Cash, $1,350. Debt, $0. She frowned slightly, then opened her spreadsheet, added the updated numbers, and watched the formula refresh at the bottom of the page. Total net worth, $160,872. She leaned back in her chair, then leaned forward again. She clicked open her fire projection tab, the one she hadn't touched in months, the one she used to obsess over weekly. Now it felt like opening a time capsule. She updated the figures, scrolled to the bottom, and there it was. Projected fire portfolio value needed. Lean fire $160,000. Projected fire portfolio value needed. Full fire $500,000. She read the top line again, then back to the bottom line. She had hit her lean fire number. Right there. That morning. Without fanfare. Without confetti. Just quietly. The math had done its work, while she'd been busy living her life. She had reached the number she once thought was impossible. The point at which, theoretically, she could cover all of her modest expenses indefinitely with a 4% safe withdrawal rate. It should have felt like fireworks. But it didn't. It felt like a soft breath exhaled after a long-held tension. She had done it, and she had almost missed it, because, somewhere along the way, she had stopped chasing milestones. Not because they didn't matter, but because something else had begun to. The feeling behind the numbers. The days filled with choice. The mornings without dread. The weekends without guilt. She smiled, the kind of smile that reaches all the way to your ribs. Then she turned to a blank page in her binder and wrote, Lean fire. Achieved. March 12th. At age 48. Then, underneath it. But more importantly, I no longer need this number to prove I'm free. I've felt it for months. In the quiet. In the stillness. In the way my shoulders have dropped. In the way I sleep through the night. In how I'm no longer afraid of opening my bills. In how I don't bargain with time anymore. She didn't tell anyone that day. Not Deirdre. Not her parents. Not her online fire group. Not even the students who had inspired half the journey. She just carried it in her pocket like a small flame, steady, silent, alive. That afternoon, she walked past the mirror in the hallway and caught a glimpse of herself. Same soft curls, same thrifted button-up, same sturdy flats. But the woman looking back, there was something different in her posture. She didn't look like someone trying to prove anything anymore. She looked like someone who knew. That weekend, she sat on her back patio with a legal pad and wrote what she called her fire reflection. Not numbers, but lessons. Things the journey had taught her that no spreadsheet could measure. Here's what she wrote. What I thought fire would feel like. Relief. Excitement. Power. Control. A great big finally. What fire actually feels like. Quiet. Spacious. Still. Enough. Home. She paused. Added one more line. Fire didn't set me free. I did. Because that's what had become clear in the months leading up to this moment. The number wasn't magic. She was the magic. The decision to try. The decision to learn. The decision to track. To question. To unlearn. The decision to trust that a binder and a budget could change the trajectory of a life. The number? It was just a mirror. What mattered was what it reflected. And now it reflected a woman who no longer second-guessed every dollar. A woman who no longer panicked about rent, about repairs, about how she'd pay for the next semester of classes or the next doctor's appointment. She still worked. Still taught math to 8th graders who rolled their eyes at word problems and passed notes under their desks. Still packed her lentil soup in reused jars. Still wore the same shoes from 2 school years ago. But she was free, because she didn't need the job. She chose it, and that changed everything. That Sunday, she went for a walk in the park near her neighborhood. Spring had started to unfurl. Bright yellow blossoms clung to the Palo Verde trees, and hummingbirds zipped like emerald sparks in the sun. She watched a boy fly a kite, watched a couple feed each other strawberries under a tree. Everything was ordinary. Everything was perfect. She sat on a bench and closed her eyes and whispered, "Thank you." Not to the market, not to the Roth, but to herself, to the woman who started late, to the woman who once thought budgeting was punishment, to the woman who built this peace one small, unglamorous decision at a time. The next day, she told Deirdre. They met for coffee. Teresa ordered hibiscus tea. Deirdre got black with cinnamon, as always. "I hit it," Teresa said. "Lean fire." Deirdre blinked. "You serious?" Teresa nodded. $160K. It happened last week. Her friend stared at her. "And you didn't throw a party? Set off fireworks? Dance on your lawn?" "I almost didn't notice." And then Teresa smiled. "Because I've been living it for a while now." Deirdre reached across the table and grabbed her hand. "Girl, you did it. And the way you did it. Quietly. Intentionally. It's beautiful." They sat in the silence, sunlight spilling through the window like honey. No urgency. No plans. Just gratitude. Teresa had hit the milestone and discovered something even more valuable on the other side. Peace was not a prize at the end of the fire race. It was something she had practiced into being. $1, one decision, one binder page at a time. There was no final ceremony, no fireworks, no spotlight or news article or parade. Just a Tuesday morning. Teresa Martinez woke up without an alarm, sunlight warming her cheek through the slats of her window. The air smelled faintly of rosemary drifting in from the backyard, and the old floor creaked as she padded barefoot toward the kitchen. Her hands moved on instinct, grind the beans, fill the kettle, steep the tea. It was the same as it had been for years now. And yet, everything was different. Because the woman who moved through this morning had changed. Not all at once, but like clay warmed by slow sun. And she had changed not because of a windfall, not because she won the lottery or sold a business or married wealth. She had changed because she chose to. Because she kept choosing, again and again, to stay when she wanted to run, to budget when she wanted to forget, to rest when she felt guilty, to invest when it was terrifying, to speak when it would have been easier to stay small. She had built a life that no one gave her a blueprint for, one that made sense to no one but her. And that, perhaps, was the greatest proof of her freedom. That morning, she sat at her tiny kitchen table, scratched, weathered, familiar, and opened her freedom binder one last time that month. Not to update numbers, not to budget, but to write a letter, not to her past self, and not to her future self, but to the woman she had become. She titled it, "Dear Me, the One Who Arrived." And this is what she wrote. You did it. Not just the lean fire number, not just the home, not just the debt-free life. You did the harder thing. You made peace. You made a life so aligned, so gently yours, that no one else could have designed it better. You gave yourself mornings without alarms, afternoons filled with students who saw you as human first, teacher second, evenings of lentil stew and books and silence that wasn't lonely anymore. You didn't need permission to bloom. You just needed time, and you gave it to yourself. Every time you said, "Not yet," to the world's pressure and yes to your own pace. You lived small, so your joy could be big. You stayed quiet, so your peace could speak loud. You didn't get there fast, but you got there with grace. She stopped writing, not because she was finished, but because there was nothing left to chase, nothing left to earn, only life, waiting to be lived on her own terms. That afternoon, she sat on her back porch with a cup of peppermint tea and watched the wind rustle through the citrus trees she'd planted the year she moved in. The lemon tree had finally bloomed, a tiny yellow orb nestled in the branches like a promise fulfilled. She closed her eyes and listened to the birds, the distant hum of traffic, the slow rhythm of a world that no longer rushed her. In the months since she reached lean fire, she had not quit her job. She still taught, though now it was part-time, 3 days a week by choice. Her district had allowed a flexible role, mentoring new teachers, running after-school financial literacy clubs, guest teaching the occasional money math unit. She wasn't working for income anymore. She was working for purpose. And that purpose came with space. The rest of her week was spent volunteering, gardening, writing curriculum, reading fiction novels that she'd missed in her 30s. She hosted monthly binder brunches at her house, small gatherings of women, some retired, some just beginning, all curious about reclaiming their financial lives. They sat around her backyard table, drank iced coffee, flipped through templates and checklists, and shared the hardest part: the shame, the silence, the not knowing. Teresa listened more than she talked, because she remembered, and because she knew now that her real job wasn't to hand them her binder. It was to hand them their power. One day, a woman in her 60s looked across the table and said, "You know what I love about you, Teresa? You make freedom feel ordinary." Teresa smiled, because that was the point: to make peace feel normal, to make discipline feel soft, to make wealth about time, not things. One afternoon in early June, she took a walk through her neighborhood. The sun was setting, casting long golden shadows across the sidewalk. She passed a boy on a bike, two women tending a garden, and a group of teenagers arguing about basketball statistics. She nodded at them, shoes crunching gently on the gravel. And as she walked, she thought about legacy. Not in the grand sense, but in the quiet way people remember you. She didn't have children, but she had taught 19 years' worth of them. She had taught them numbers, yes. But more than that, she had taught them what it meant to build something from the ground up, to be brave enough to live below your means, to be bold enough to tell the truth about money, to be kind enough to give what you can when you can. And those lessons would outlive her. That, too, was a kind of inheritance. Later that summer, she received a letter in the mail, handwritten, from Lucia, her former student. Inside was a photo of Lucia in front of her college dorm room. "Miss Martinez," the note read, "I used your budget template. I got a part-time job and saved before I came here. And guess what? I'm studying economics. I want to teach people like you taught me. Thank you for showing me it wasn't too late for you. It made me believe it's not too early for me." Teresa held the letter to her chest and cried, not out of sadness, but out of awe, because this was what fire had given her. The chance to change not just her life, but someone else's. Not because she was flashy, not because she was perfect, but because she had told the truth about money and lived her values when no one was watching. On her 49th birthday, she went to the mountains. Just her, a borrowed cabin, her binder, and a blank journal. She lit a candle that night and wrote, "I'm not chasing anymore. I'm arriving, again and again." Fire was never the finish line. It was the threshold of a life I own, of a rhythm I trust, of a woman I now know, and she is enough. If you've ever looked at your bank account and felt shame, if you've ever wondered if you started too late, or feared you'd never catch up, let me tell you something I wish I'd heard sooner. You are not broken. You are just unschooled in a system that was never built to set you free. But you can learn. You can begin. You can write a new story, no matter your age, your income, or your mistakes. I started with a binder. With overdraft fees and a dusty Roth IRA I didn't know how to fund. And today, I live in a home I own. I work because I choose to, and I sleep with a quiet heart. If I can do that, so can you. Start with $1. Start with one decision. Start with believing you are worth saving. In every way. Subscribe to this channel. Share this story with someone who needs hope more than headlines. And keep watching, because freedom, it's not found in a windfall. It's built, one quiet, powerful choice at a time.